wanted to share a story with you today. It's a true story, and it's a story about a colleague of mine who lives in a high-rise riverside apartment, and about a stolen bike. But before I do, I wanted to just set the scene for where we see the CCTV industry today and where we see it going. And certainly from what we're hearing and what we're seeing, that the trends in this industry are that surveillance is moving to the cloud edge, because that is much more powerful in terms of an environment where you can do analysis and where you can view footage from anywhere, and where you can actually create opportunities for new applications of CCTV. The second thing we're actually looking down the barrel of is a post-Brexit, post-energy, post-inflationary recession. Everyone's talking about it the second half of this year, and with recessions, historically, crime rises. So surveillance and CCTV has been a very good way of reducing the crimes that have been occurring in the neighborhood. And the third thing that we're seeing in terms of trends is that the opportunity to use events and analytics changes the dynamic of surveillance from a passive reactive model to a proactive intervention model. And that's an exciting opportunity. Now, we talk to a lot of executives in housing associations, riverside apartment complexes, and what we're hearing, the biggest challenges are they're getting a poor return. That is, the residents that are paying for the surveillance service are getting a poor return for their surveillance investments. And another thing we're hearing is that there are system outages that are unknown. They don't know that there's been an outage or that the cameras are down until after the event, and then they go back and look at the footage and find that there's actually no footage because the cameras were down. And then thirdly, what we're hearing is if there has been an event, then somebody's got to get in a car or travel physically to where the network video recorder or digital video recorder is located, and sit down there for hours, sometimes days, to find an event that may have occurred for 1 minute 2 or 3 weeks ago. And that is pretty typical of what we see. But let me now talk about the adoption of this technology, because it's moving quite quickly. If I look at the adoption curve, and I simply have a Y matrix here represents value, and the x-axis represents adoption over time. In the 1990s, we started with analog CCTV, and there's still a ton of it out there. In the 2000s, we saw a move to IP, and 2010, that basically nothing much different between analog and IP, only it was using digital IP networks. Then in 2010s, we saw the first surveillance moving to the cloud, but it was really the same model as 24/7 continuous recording, and they were just capturing them in the cloud. No real advantages there. But here we are, 2020, and we're seeing events and AI creating exciting new opportunities for video analysis in surveillance, and a whole suite of other applications outside of surveillance. So that is where we see the marketplace today, and a lot of the customers that we talk to are somewhere between here and here, and they actually want to get to here quickly. But back to the true story. So, Riverside apartment complex, footballers living here, high rise, paying a lot of money for these properties to buy them and to live in them. And he's bought a new £3,000 bike, and went down to ride it one weekend and found that it wasn't there because the bike shed had been broken into and his bicycle had been stolen. And he went to the police to get permission to review the footage. They went back to look at the footage, and then they found that the cameras were down. There were 6 cameras that were actually in the area of the bicycle shed, and all of them had been down for 2 weeks because they were waiting for a software update, so that event was lost and the perpetrator got away with it. But let me take this story a little bit further. Let's say that during the commission of the crime they were seen, and there was a serious assault because the perpetrator didn't want to get identified, and they actually, during the commission of the crime, cause grievous bodily harm, they actually know that they're on CCTV, or in fact, in this case, they don't know they're on CCTV because the cameras are down, but often the perpetrator will try and steal the network video recorder from the server room. And this happens a lot, so the evidence disappears. So that's typically what we're seeing today. So cameras are down, events are occurring, those events are unknown, and if there is a serious event, that camera, that DVR, and indeed the cameras can be stolen. So that's the situation that occurred with my colleague. But let me tell you what we're doing with another group of customers, and these are housing associations. And in this particular instance, a housing association in the north was having a lot of problems with increasing antisocial behaviour, with violence on the estate, and they wanted to have a more proactive way of intervening in the event of antisocial behaviour or violence or theft or burglary, i.e. people being in the kitchen after 8 p.m. If that happened, then they wanted to know about it, but of course they didn't have any way of finding out. But that's what they set out to achieve. They wanted to be able to capture events when they were happening and flip their surveillance model from delayed, passive, reactive to more proactive intervention. The problem they had was that there was no funding, or housing associations typically do not want to invest in CCTV. It's a grudge investment, and the other problem they had were people on the management team were very skeptical of moving CCTV to the cloud. So we had a number of challenges in this dialogue with this housing association, until we got to a point when they actually saw the Cloudview platform in action, and they realized that we could extend the life of their existing analog infrastructure. And this place has over 100 analog cameras and about 150 IP cameras. They realized that we could extend the useful life of those serviceable legacy cameras, and we can actually deliver them a cloud surveillance environment, which would enable them to go from to increase the safety of their residents, to increase the speed of the interaction and intervention, and ultimately to drive increased resident satisfaction. So that, in fact, is a story that is very similar to the story here, and we're working across housing associations and riverside residential developments to improve to get people up this adoption curve so that they can take advantage of the analytics and the events as they're happening. So that's actually Cloudview's solution. And we can support basically any camera, analog, IP, mixed manufacturers, doesn't matter who makes the camera. We can support analog IP cameras on the same integrated platform, and that makes it a very cost-effective way of moving up the adoption curve to get more value from the CCTV and surveillance investments, and that's a very cost-effective way of doing it instead of ripping and replacing. It's interesting, actually. In the past 6 months, I think we've seen a shift in the marketplace from an interest in cloud, wanting to find out more about it, to actually adoption. So I would suggest that we are at the inflection point, or the point of the hockey stick when it starts to boot up. And I know that because we are now being approached by major organizations who want to partner with us to augment their video applications, whether it's surveillance or whether it's security, whether it's parking. I mean, there are a whole suite of applications now that want to integrate with a cloud surveillance solution. Access control and video creates more value than just access control and video alone. Enforcing parking for electronic vehicles, for instance, integrates a number of different technologies, and what we're seeing now is that people are actually prepared to invest, and there are projects that are funded, and we're very excited about where this is going. So I definitely think we're at an inflection point, and truly this industry, the CCTV industry, has been a laggard industry in moving to the cloud. Because if you think about how long you've had a phone in your pocket where you've been accessing all of the information that's important about you in the cloud, I'm on my iPhone 7, but I know the iPhone 13's out there, and that's probably at least 10 years ago that we actually had this amazing shift to applications in the cloud. When I came into the organisation, I had a look around, understood what we had to do, and I used an analogy. I was at the river a few weeks ago, and I watched the Oxford-Cambridge boat race, and I used to row, and I was a lightweight. I rowed at Nepean Rowing Club in Penrith in New South Wales, and I was a lightweight oarsman, but there was a need to put this maiden eight together, and the bowman was out sick, and he couldn't actually row, so they picked me to sit in the bow seat. Now, I was about 11 stone 10, and the rest of the guys in the crew were about 14 stone, big men, big powerful men. And I remember being put into this eight. I'd never rowed with them before, and we were in the New South Wales Championship Regatta, and these guys were so powerful, all I could do was just keep up with them rather than and trying not to catch a crab, which flips you out of the boat and stops the boat. And the analogy there is just like a startup. A rowing boat's like a startup. Even if you don't have the experience, you have to pull your weight as effectively as you can. So I think what you have to do in a startup is you have to get the right people in the boat and the wrong people out of the boat. And I think we've done that now. I think we've recruited an excellent sales team who are prepared to deliver and learn and become a part of an effective sales machine. And part of that is loving to learn and building a learning culture, which was my ethos when I came here. So it's a constant learning and constant coaching and getting better. And we've put all the things in place now in terms of our technology stack to make that happen. So I'm really excited with where we are today with 4 really good salespeople who are very, very excited about the opportunity and who are hungry to be successful. So that's a big transition. People are starting to realize that the old model of server-based CCTV is okay in certain environments, but as soon as you have distributed environments where you have multiple people wanting to access footage from various locations, then you've got a logistic nightmare. So that is a very, very good use case for cloud, and we're seeing a lot of people realize now that they can actually change their surveillance model from having to go there and view footage to actually being able to view that footage now online from anywhere and be able to control who views it, what they see, what they do with it, and to be able to output that footage for evidence very, very quickly and securely so that it's tamper-proof. So I think that combined with the fact that costs are coming down, I think those things together are creating a sort of we're over that chasm now. I gave a talk at the security event a couple of weeks ago, and I asked for a show of hands at the start of the talk. I said, hands up those who are using analog cameras, in the audience of about 30 people, and half of the hands went up. And then I said, well, hands up those who are using IP networking cameras, and the other half of the hands went up. And then I asked, hands up those who are using cloud surveillance today, and we didn't get any hands, 0. And then I asked, hands up those who are planning to implement cloud in the next 12 months, and half of the hands went up. So that's how come I know that we're in this hockey stick where we're going to go basically from not many people out there using it today to, yes, we're going to adopt it. And that's what you call, we're just across the chasm now, I believe, in cloud surveillance, in terms of what Geoffrey Moore would talk about with, the cycle of discontinuous innovation. Yeah, I think, as I looked at the security event, almost everybody out there was selling hardware. They were selling cameras, or they were selling network video recorders, or they were selling access control equipment, or fire and alarm equipment. And we're the only people at that show, we were the only people at that show that actually could take somebody's existing infrastructure and extend that to the cloud without major investment. No rip and replace. You've got serviceable analog cameras out there that are still functioning perfectly well. Why throw them away? If you can extend the life of that legacy equipment and future-proof the existing installation and the new cameras that go in, so that you can add applications, artificial intelligence later on in the cloud, then that really differentiated us from everybody else there, because most other people wanted to sell cameras and hardware, and that meant rip and replace. And instead of that, we were extending the life of legacy equipment while taking people and giving them better outcomes from surveillance in the cloud. The difference between general surveillance or traditional surveillance, 24/7, is that your camera may be recording a blank wall for 19 and a half hours of the day, and the other 3.5 hours of the day people are walking past. But do you really need to have that footage stored? And the problem with the cloud, of course, is that if you were going to store all that blank wall and footage, you got to pay for the storage. So by just capturing events when they happen and storing those events, you actually reduce the amount of storage that's required. Plus, you have the opportunity when those events occur to be proactive in alerting people. For instance, if anyone accesses the kitchen after 9 o'clock, then send an alert to me, because I know there shouldn't be anyone in there. Or if anyone opens that door to the bike locker after 10 p.m., send me an alert, because I know that there's nobody should be riding their bike at 10 p.m. So this is the opportunity with event-based surveillance, is to combine it with alerting, so that then you can go and do a live view and see what's going on at the time, and then potentially intervene. Call the police, call security, get somebody in there to deal with the event as it's occurring. Six months from today, I think I see a very different company. I see a number of major strategic partnerships, OEM relationships, white labeling of our technology, and a very significant uptick in the new name business that we're doing across the country. So yes, I think we're poised for great success, and it's going to be a very exciting time. I've been in the technology industry now for 40 years, and I can tell you there's no more exciting time to be selling technology than when a technology crosses the chasm from the early adopters to the early majority. That's a fun time to be selling technology, and we've got a great solution for those companies that want to take advantage of the cloud and leverage what the cloud gives at incremental cost.